Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here today. Looking forward to our Wellness and Weight Loss Wednesday episode, where we are going to be covering the dangers of a long-term low-carb diet. Now, I know this is a very controversial topic, especially with so many people promoting a very low carb, a keto style or carnivore style diet. But what I don't want to do is go back over what I've spoken about before in terms of the carnivore based diet. I will certainly link that up. I've spoken about a keto diet many times before today too. But what I want to talk about is lower carbs in general and the science behind it, actually how it affects the gut microbiome. So what I don't want to do is to ever get into a place where I say that when you have a particular dogma, you need to defend it to its death, because that is not the way that nutrition or health should work. What a health practitioner should do is look at all of the available information and be able to make recommendations based on that. And they also have to understand that there is no one diet for every human alive. However, there is a foundation of all diets that most people should be following, especially in the long term. So I'll talk about long-term based dieting, of what it looks like, and then I'll also share with you in the short term what you might be able to do in order to correct gut-based issues and really fix that gut microbiome. But the reason why this came up is that there's been a lot of questions on this, and there will always be a lot of questions on this topic, because the truth is that when you follow a low-carb diet, you do get certain results. And those results are typically weight loss, water loss, and for some people, a cessation of a lot of autoimmune-based issues. And I've explained this before as to how this works and why this works. And so I'll just give you the very short version for right now. And you can go back to listen to previous podcasts as to the specifics as to why it works. But when you go on a lower carb diet, and again, we do this very specifically, and I'll get into the full details in a moment we do this very specifically with our CBO protocol for the gut, and we do this with our Fatlocity weight loss program. And the reason is that a lower carb diet, no doubt about it, it helps people lose weight. Now, part of the reason is that yes, it does help you tap more into body fats and it lowers blood sugar, at least in the beginning. But what happens is that the body also retains less water. When you eat carbohydrates, you naturally retain water. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It is simply storing water along with some of that glucose or glycogen. That's very, very normal. And that's actually healthy for the body to an extent. Now, the other part to all of this is as well, is that when you are following a lower carb diet, you are not feeding the gut microbiome. So to a greater degree, meaning like if you're only getting less than 50 carbohydrates per day, and a lot of it isn't fermentable based fiber, well, the microbiome begins to shrink. And as it begins to shrink, well, there's less yeast overgrowth, there can be less SIBO. So that might seem like, oh, well, that's a good thing. But the truth is that in the long run, it's not. And here's why. Eventually, most people do eat carbohydrates again. And so what happens is that yeast overgrowth or candida overgrowth and that bacterial overgrowth does grow back. And it grows back and the same exact issues are there because you never corrected the problem. You used what I call a conventional medicine, Band-Aid based approach, and you used nutrition or pharmaceuticals or whatever it might be to simply mask the symptoms. So if you're using a diet to mask symptoms, it's the same thing as using a pharmaceutical. You are not getting to the root cause. And again, I'm not saying that to degrade any other practitioner or any other plan. What I'm saying is that there are levels to this, and you really want to get to the lowest level of correcting whatever the underlying issue is. So if it's blood sugar, let's correct that. If it's an inability to tap into body fat, let's correct that. If it's an issue with the gut microbiome, yeast overgrowth, candida overgrowth, H. pylori, parasites, etc., well, let's correct that rather than having someone just go low carb for their life. And the reason why I'm mentioning that to you today is that we are seeing that low carb diets, and there's been a bunch of epidemiologists, and there's been a bunch of research on this that many people will try to refute, that says that it lowers their lifespan. Now, it could lower their lifespan by as much as 30%. Well, what's 30%? Well, it would simply be, let's say the average person lives 75 years. That's men and women averaged together. Well, 7.5, that's 15, right? That's like 22 and a half or so. So that's considerably less. That's, now we're getting into the mid 50s, 60s, and that's just obviously an average. Now, when we look at that, I would say, yeah, there's a lot of holes to those studies because we need to correct for a lot of different things in those particular studies. However, what we do know and what we can prove, and through places like a lot of the labs that actually run these reports, one of them being the American Gut Project, is when people are on lower carb diets for a longer period of time, their gut microbiome changes, and it's not for the better. So I just want people to know that. In the long term, it is not for the better. And I want to share with you exactly what we're finding. And then I'm going to give you what I think a happy medium would be and where I think a lot of people are going wrong, simply from misguided research rather than obviously trying to harm anyone. No one's trying to harm anyone. But I just think that we get a little bit too fixated on what works in the short term versus long-term based results. And that simply comes, I think, with having more clinical based practice. So people with more, I just don't see a lot of people with a longer standing clinical practice saying that people should go low carb for that long. And I get worried about a lot of the MDs that are recommending this, especially since they are not doing any nutritional based study. They're just looking at others then, okay, well, what should we be doing? And yes, it works in the short term, but again, it's masking symptoms and we can't do that specifically. Okay, so let's look at specifically though, what happens with the gut microbiome. So there's been many studies done, and one of the studies I just want to share with you is this. And again, this was with healthier people, which I think it would be exacerbated even more with older people. But what happened was they put people on a lower fat diet where 20% of their calories was coming from fat. They put people on a moderate diet, which would be 30% calories from fat, and then 40% of those calories from fat, and they reduced carbohydrates in sequence to that. Now, keep in mind that a typical ketogenic diet is going to be 70+% fat, and it should be, because the truth is, and I'll do a little sidebar here just for a moment, most people who say they're on a keto diet are not on a keto diet, and that's why they're really doing okay. But they're not really on a keto diet. They're on more of a paleo diet, and that's perfectly acceptable. So just keep in mind that most people are doing okay. They're really not on a keto diet. I mean, they're honestly not. I see people all the time saying, oh, I'm following a keto diet. I say, okay, just, well, what does that mean? Like, what are you actually eating? They're like, oh, well, I have berries in the morning. And I say, okay, how much? And they say, oh, about 2 cups. I say, okay. And then they go through it and they go through all the things they're eating, and their protein makes up about 25% of their diet. So they're eating more of like a zone-based diet. They're eating 40% maybe fat. Oh, this is obviously reversed from the zone, but they're eating 40% fat, 30% protein, like 30% carbs, or maybe just a little less carbs. That's not a keto diet. It's not even close. So I think we're missing the point too of keto-based diets. It's called a ketogenic diet because your body's producing ketones, and it's producing ketones because it's moved through its liver glycogen stores, and it's using ketones now as an energy-based source. Well, that you're on a keto diet if your body's producing ketones. You're not on a keto diet if your body's not producing ketones. This always happens with every industry. It's like, okay, people were doing a paleo diet, and then a paleo diet became, well, yeah, it's kind of anything that isn't maybe processed flour. Well, I don't know, is that a keto diet? I mean, is that a paleo-based diet? So we're really morphing diets to fit the marketing of the day. But a keto diet means that on that diet, you are producing ketones for fuel. So if you're on a diet that is not forcing you to produce ketones, then you're really not on a keto-based diet. You're just on a lower carbohydrate diet and a higher fat diet. That's totally different, and it's actually quite unhealthy. So if your fat is up and your carbs are up, you're going to have a much greater chance for type 2 diabetes and heart disease. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the correlations are really great. If you eat a high-fat diet and also raise insulin levels at the same time, that's a recipe for disaster. There almost isn't a worse diet than that. There honestly is not. And also, just as another aside, if you are eating 25% of your diet from protein, most likely you're producing plenty of glycogen for the liver. And that's because the amino acids from protein can and do get converted to sugar, to glycogen. So let's just, again, I don't want to confuse the science. This is how the human body works. So if you're going to do a keto diet and that you really want to get the benefits of a keto diet, it has to really be a keto-based diet. Now, I'm not promoting that. I don't have an issue with it in the short term. The issue I have is when it extends beyond a period of, let's say, 2 to 4 weeks maximum. And here's why. Okay, again, this wasn't even with the 70+% fat. When looking at these particular studies, after 6 months, not 3 weeks, okay? Again, we do a low carb diet for 3 weeks as well. That's why I don't want to confuse people. I know, like I've seen what works. The thing is, we've been doing this in clinical practice now for over 20 years. We know it works, but I don't want to confuse short-term versus long-term. So we do it in the short term, okay? We don't call it a keto diet. If people get into ketosis, fine. We do a lower carbohydrate diet in the shorter term. Now, after 6 months though, and that's where the study looks at. The people on the higher fat diet had shifted to a negative impact on their health based on their gut microbiome. What we found was that the people eating a high fat diet versus those on a lower fat diet. Now, again, it wasn't super low fat. It was 20% to 30%, but it just wasn't above 40%. They found that the bacteria, the beneficial bacteria in the gut microbiome that produces short-chain fatty acids began to drop. And the problem is, if you're not producing these short-chain fatty acids that come a lot of times from fermentable-based foods, such as fruit or veggies or even legumes, what happens is those short-chain fatty acids, when they become less, they don't balance regulation as well. And that's really important because if you're not balancing inflammation, it can lead to a host of other issues. Okay, what else in terms of data was found? Well, some of the bacteria in the higher fat group were shown with the same type of bacteria with people that had higher levels of blood sugar that led to more type 2 diabetes. Now, this is very interesting, okay, because we're going to have more on this in the future. So some things I want to bring you before it's actually proven yet. They are showing that high fat can lead to diabetes as well. And here's why I want to bring that up, is because if it's inflammatory or if it's higher levels of polyunsaturated fats, it can damage the cell membranes as well. And even very high levels of saturated fat can begin to block the cell membranes. And I've spoken about this before. So a higher level of sterols in cell membranes lead to poor cell membrane osmosis. Okay, it's more harder fats in the cell membrane. There's less back and forth between the cell. So it's intracellular, which is inside the cell, and extracellular, which is outside of the cell. It makes it harder to get glucose and it makes it harder to get other nutrients in. This isn't for everyone, and I just want to say that, okay? But for some people, it can be, and that's why genetics do matter. But it's also why, how do you know? You don't always know, and that's why we can't get super far in one direction or another. Okay, let me go on though. There's other as well. People on a higher fat diet had an increase in certain molecules linked to inflammation. And I'm going to link this up too. This is the particular study. So if we go over to stevencabral.com/1531, I can link up studies as well. So when looking at the studies, what we found overall is that there are benefits to low carb in the short term. Those benefits seem to be things with tumors, and that's why I talk about this as well, that this can be used as a medical-based diet. It's been shown to work particularly well for epilepsy, as well as type 2 diabetes. Over the short term, that's what it says, at least over the short term. And I agree. We do the same exact things. Why? Because we want to better regulate blood sugar. We want to better regulate inflammation in the short term, and we want to decrease the amount of its overall blood sugar dysregulation. And again, that leads to inflammation. I spoke about that on just yesterday's show. So super important that we look at all these things. So now what am I recommending to you? Because I don't want to confuse you even more, because that's essentially what our industry does, right? Our nutrition industry, fitness industry, health industry, it's more confusing than it is anything else. Well, the thing is this, to lose weight, to rebalance the gut microbiome, there is a period of time where most people do well on a lower carbohydrate diet. It does not mean that you need to be on a keto diet, and it certainly doesn't mean that you need to be on a carnivore-based diet, okay? Because there are no long-term studies showing that those are great diets for healthy human beings. And again, let me give you one more aside before I give you exactly what to do. People all the time point to the Maasai, they point to the Inuit or Inuit, and let me just tell you, yes, they have less heart disease. There's no doubt about it. And yes, they have less type 2 diabetes, at least for the Maasai. But the problem is this. The Maasai lived to an age of about 45 years old for women or 42 years old for men in some research to the highest I've ever seen is the low 60s. So we are not talking about a group of people that lives a very long life. Please, again, understand that a lot of people promote certain diet plans to you, certain even supplements to you, certain whatever to you, because that is their business or whatever it might be. You can never put profits above people. The information as a practitioner has to be pure. You won't always get it right. And I'll just say that. You won't always get it right. But come from a point of purity, never from a point of trying to promote something. Now, you have to promote as a practitioner something to people. So there's no doubt about that. You have to give them a diet plan, a gut healing plan, a weight loss plan. You have to give people a plan. There's no doubt about it. But never let that cloud the information you give people. And if you're talking about heart disease, you're not going to see a lot of heart disease in people that don't live past 60 years old, okay? And same for the Inuit or Inuit, depending on how you prefer to pronounce it. They live on average 12 to 15 years less than their fellow counterparts in the North, we'll say Canadians, okay? So let's be careful for people that, again, don't live past their early 60s to maybe mid 60s. We can't use that as the end-all be-all because hopefully we live a long, healthy life, at least an extra 10 years past life expectancy, which would then be the late 80s for most people. So what we need to do is follow a much healthier and balance-based approach. And for as much as people like to try to find holes in the blue zones, you can't. And yes, it's not just diet alone. It's reducing stress, it's social, but believe me, people in the blue zones aren't super low stress either because there's all sorts of things with not getting enough food and this and that. So what we have to look at is diet is part of that, right? Exercise is part of that. Moving the body, getting 10,000 steps a day is part of that. There's no doubt about it. But when we look at the foods they ate, we do understand that a lot of these cultures were not on high-fat, low-carb diets. They had a very moderate-based approach. And that's why the podcast I did before called The Foundation of All Diets, please do check out that show. And the one on the Nordic diet, you can check out that show as well, which is very similar to the Mediterranean diet, is it's a very balanced approach. And I didn't come up with the Mediterranean diet, right? That's not my research. And it's not even the research of the blue zones. The Mediterranean diet has been proven over and over in research to be a great foundational place to start. It helps with heart disease. It helps with high blood pressure. It helps with type 2 diabetes. Why? It's because it's low inflammatory. It's not high in processed foods. It's high in healthy fats, which are mainly monounsaturated fats. It's not high in meat. It's high in more fish or high in vegetables. And they don't stay away from berries and certain types of fruit. So we have to look at what actually does work. Now, a lot of people need to get there. And so I agree. The first part of our fat-losity weight loss system or our CBO protocol for rebalancing the gut microbiome is a lower carbohydrate diet for 21 days. That's the truth. Because what we need to do is get back to a baseline of helping people re-regulate healthy levels of inflammation, healthy levels of blood sugar, healthy levels of insulin, healthy levels of hormones. So we need to get there. And the body's so out of balance, it needs a heroic push. And that's why if you do keto or you do carnivore, or you do one of these things for 3 weeks, you're going to see the benefit because you're giving your body a heroic push. But after that, we need to start to come back to center. So this is what we do. And I tell people exactly what we do because I want the information to be open sourced. So what we do is that lower carbohydrate diet, but it's specific. It's not just any carbs. We're mainly doing vegetables. That's for our fat-losity system. And then for our CBO protocol, we do allow fruit. We allow a certain number of fruit that is not fermentable in the gut. But then what we find is this, and the studies show this. After 3 weeks, we begin to add in some more starchy grains or a little bit more fruit because we have to add food back in that allows for the gut microbiome to flourish in terms of good bacteria versus negative bacteria. That means good bacteria that helps promote health and that balances inflammation versus that creates more lipopolysaccharides, which we found with higher fat, higher saturated fat diets. I don't have a problem with saturated fats. They've done nothing to me. I'm not against them. But we know when we put them through the roof for a longer period of time, it's not a healthy thing, no matter how many people try to say that it is. It's just not. Can you eat saturated fat? Absolutely. Should you be eating 200 grams of saturated fat a day? No, I think that it not only is bizarre, it's certainly not human for how humans are meant to be eating. So just because some is okay doesn't mean a ton is okay or is better. So the last part is this, is after about 6 to 8 weeks, even on our CBO protocol, which is rebalancing the gut microbiome, and again, we want to be careful with fermentable food, we actually know that we need to add back in some of those fructo, oligo, di, mono, and polysaccharides. Now, these types of foods in particular, that can come from certain types of fruits and vegetables and starches, that we need to add some back in. And the reason is this, is that the gut microbiome, it becomes imbalanced in another way after that point. Because if there are not enough fermentable-based foods, the gut microbiome shrinks. And when it shrinks, it is not good for long-term overall health. And I mean shrinking in terms of good bacteria. Because as we start to lose those beneficial bacteria, we stop making as many good B vitamins and serotonin, which leads to melatonin for healthy sleep. And the same things that regulate a lot of the interleukins and balanced inflammatory-based, immune-based modulators in the body. So it starts to get deep and complex, but that is why we simply have to follow a normal diet eventually, right? So do what we need to do in the short term. Really, 21 days is enough for most people, whether they're doing a 21-day functional medicine detox, a 21-day Fatlocity first phase, a 21-day CBO protocol. Choose any one or work with your practitioner or follow your favorite program. I'm okay with that. But eventually, we need to start to add back in some fermentable fiber. Now, if you're just keto all the way and it's like part of your, dogma and your belief system, then find something like supplemental fructo-oligosaccharides, FOSs. Find something that you can add back in that would allow you to still keep your gut microbiome going. And cyclical keto or something like that, if you're interested, is a much better idea than long-term. No human on earth would want to have put themselves in a keto-based state for a long-term period of time. They would only have gotten into that state for a lack of carbohydrates during a period of time when that was not available. That would not be an ideal state for the human. They would not have chosen that. We're choosing this today, and it does not make a lot of sense in the long term. So here's what I want you to think about. Find a way that as your body becomes more balanced, you can find the right carbohydrate load for you. For some people, it might be 75 grams a day. For other people, it might be 150. It is based on the person, and I can't go into all of this today, but you can certainly go to stephencabral.com/podcasts and start listening to my shows on Ayurveda as well. There's a little graphic at the top. You can scroll through and you can click on the Ayurvedic shows. It will begin to teach you that the Vata body type, the ectomorph body type, does much better. They can eat hundreds of carbohydrates typically per day. Blood sugar maintains regular levels, and it actually is hugely beneficial for the nervous system. Whereas on the opposite side of the spectrum, the endomorph body type or the kapha-based body type, well, when they start to eat a lot of carbohydrates, they gain more body weight. Their blood sugar does not stay as regulated, and they tend more towards type 2 diabetes. Well, you'll be able to figure this out yourself, even if you don't even know your body type, that you start with a lower carbohydrate diet and you start to ease back in 25 carbohydrates or so per day. And you do that for a week at a time. How is your body tolerating that? And of course, it should be good quality carbohydrates. I'm not recommending processed food. I'm recommending good whole food quality sources. Sweet potatoes, purple potatoes. Oatmeal works well for some people, not for others. Berries, lots of good veggies, all of that, can add up, and that's really, really beneficial. Okay, the other part is this. There's big discrepancy over healthy fat. Remember, soybean oil, canola oil, these are not healthy fats, right? Stick to your healthy fats, more of your Mediterranean fats first. So even if you're doing keto and you're adding more fat, go with the olive oil, go with the avocado, or go with the walnuts. They're going to be much better sources of omega-3 and monounsaturated fats than adding in a lot more of the potentially more inflammatory polyunsaturated. And again, it can go either way with your saturated fats. But we know that monounsaturated fats, at least, are much healthier and do the body good. So I could go on and on with this podcast. The goal is this. It's not to say that anyone is right or wrong. Everyone's right and everyone's wrong if you extrapolate that information far enough over enough people, right? So here's the thing. Lower carb does work for a shorter period of time. And then what we want to do for overall long-term health and the health of the gut microbiome, which is the bacteria in your intestines, large intestine, small intestine, you want to begin to work those carbohydrates back in. And it should most likely be a moderate amount of carbohydrates based on what that person needs, right? So that's what I want, is I want us to realize that a healthy diet is a balanced diet. And whenever you go super high protein, super high carbs, or super high fat, it's most likely not a balanced diet, right? So they all work in the short term, but what I want you to eventually learn and realize and come to grips with really is that there is a true foundation for all diets, and it's a whole lot more balanced than we might give it credit for. Thank you so much for tuning into today's show. As always, if this was helpful, please do feel free to share it with anyone you believe it could serve. Take care, everyone. Before you go, I wanted to ask you this question. What if I could teach you in just a couple of hours how to transform your thyroid, hormones, adrenal, cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugar, weight loss, energy, mood, brain, pregnancy, anti-aging, or many other health-related issues? After 20 years in private practice, after seeing and overseeing 250,000 client appointments, I sincerely feel I have the real-world data and have found the answer you've been searching for. So what I've done is spent hundreds of hours of my own time refining what you need to know in order to uncover your underlying root cause health issues and then begin to rebalance the body and bring it back to a state of robust health and wellness. I'm going to teach you exactly what I do in my private practice so you can understand how you got here and now what you need to do in order to heal. You'll receive all of the important success checklists, protocols, and even ways to customize it to make the program fit your busy life. And you'll get all of this at a fraction of the price. Let me save you the time, money, energy, stress, and frustration of not knowing what to do next. Instead of reading dozens of books on the topic and seeing multiple practitioners, I will condense everything that you need to know in just a few hours of video tutorials that you can watch and listen to anywhere. Together, we will make this healing process an enjoyable one that you can take with you for the rest of your life. I wish you all of the best of health and happiness, and I hope to be able to guide you on your healing journey through my Health Results Accelerators. Simply choose the health imbalance you're currently suffering from, and by the end of today, you'll know what went wrong and how to get well again. I guarantee it. For details, head over now to stephencabral.com/courses.